Think those are all of the statements that are going to be suppressed. Let's bring back in our defense attorney, Lara Yeretsian. Thank you for staying with us to continue to break down back in Iowa now with this case. Those are some pretty damning statements that were made by the defendant in this case. Do you think that those are going to hurt the prosecution not being allowed into evidence?
It all depends. It all depends on what else is being allowed in. But I mean, legally, if he's not properly Mirandized, which is what I understand, and also he's a Spanish speaker and he wasn't provided with an interpreter, then these statements should not be allowed to come in. Now, would it be better for the prosecution if these statements come in? I think that's a given, and that's pretty obvious. Of course, it's going to be a lot easier to have, it's basically a confession. He leads them to the body, and he's giving them detailed directions to the specific location of the body in the cornfield. And only a person who's either committed the crime or witnessed it or has seen where the body is would be able to do that. So it's pretty damning evidence. Is it going to hurt the prosecution? It may or may not. It all depends on what else they've got. And it looks like they've got some forensic evidence of the blood in the trunk. So there's some other evidence here. Of course, like I said, it would have been better for them, but legally they can't use these statements.
Right. And so there's been some chatter about, I don't understand, if he said it, it should be allowed in. But let's talk about the importance of all of our constitutional rights. And he has a right to be Mirandized if he's arrested, saying that he has the right to remain silent. Anything he says can be used against him. And there's also a right that that be said in a way that the person can understand. So if they don't speak English as a first language, there are ways to have interpreters, translations to ensure that they actually understand the rights that are being told to them. The fact that he's undocumented does not mean that he has those rights here in the United States, correct?
Of course, it doesn't take away his right to be Mirandized. He's a defendant. It doesn't matter if the defendant is legally here, is undocumented, is a citizen, is naturalized. None of that matters. Every defendant, regardless of their immigration status, constitutionally has a right to be Mirandized. And that's all it is. I mean, it would have been such a simple thing for them to do. Bring in an interpreter and Mirandize him properly. And then right away, they could have started questioning him, right? Because I've seen it happen in a lot of cases where the investigators or the detectives Mirandize the defendant or the suspect, and right away, before even asking him anything, right away they just start asking him about, waiving his rights. They just start asking him, questioning him about the case, and that's all it takes. Just say it, and then you protect the sanctity of the statement. But if you don't do that, that means you didn't follow the law, and automatically the court has no choice but to throw that out.
I absolutely agree. And everyone's rights need to be protected. There are laws that need to be applied for a reason. So certainly agree with you. His constitutional rights are to be protected. And if they're not, that's the reason some of the evidence is suppressed. So even if some of the statements are suppressed, if he tells a different story, if he says something different than what these suppressed statements say, those can be used to impeach him, to show the jury he's not credible. He's saying this now, but he said this before. Do you agree that suppressed statements could be used to impeach? I know that's what the judges ruled, but are you in agreement with that as a defense attorney?
Yes, I mean, that is the law. If he takes the stand, if he decides, I am going to take the stand in my own defense, and he tells a story that's contradictory to some of the things he has told law enforcement, well, I mean, then it's fair play, right? They should be able to bring in his prior statements to impeach him, to show that, look, jury, he told us something completely different. So, and you need to know this. The jury's going to make a credibility decision, right, about this testimony by the defendant. And I think it's crucial for them to see any contradictory or inconsistent statements that he's made outside of the court.
And again, these are all the rules of law that the court has to apply that govern trial proceedings, that are standard, typical in all trials. And then the jury has to make a decision on whether or not they will convict. It sounds like the prosecution has a good case.
I agree with you. It sounds like a good case. It would not have been a good case if they didn't have the blood in the trunk, but that really connect him to the crime. I mean, the defense could have argued, hey, this is a coerced statement. Look, he doesn't remember parts of it. That means they're planting all of this into his mind, and he's just telling him whatever they want. And the fact that he took him to the cornfield is because probably the investigators or the detectives planted that in his head. They keep on asking him grueling questioning for many, many, many hours, sleepless hours. English is not his first language. He speaks Spanish. So, they could have the defense could have raised some issues with that statement. But when there's forensic evidence, that's when you start having issues. Now, I don't know how solid the forensic evidence is, but from what I heard is that her blood was in his trunk. That means at some point he was definitely involved. He had the body in the trunk or something related to her blood was in the trunk. That in itself, I think, is very strong evidence.
Yeah, and that in conjunction with the case, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, I was just going to say in conjunction with that, the fact that he did lead the investigators to her body in the cornfield. I guess without other forensic evidence, you could say, well, he just stumbled upon her, knew where she was, and wanted to get the police to her, and he was afraid to report it. Let's talk about one other issue, or is this an issue? I value your expertise as a criminal defense attorney. So my question is this: does it make a difference that he is undocumented in terms of criminal charges against him and being sentenced here in the United States?
As far as the case itself, the criminal case, it shouldn't make a difference. At least I know in California, it's not something that can be used in a trial in any way, in a negative way. Will it have any impact on his status? Of course. I mean, he could be, if convicted of the charge, I wouldn't be surprised if even after he does his time, if he's deported, or he at least goes through the proceedings and has to face an immigration judge who's going to decide his fate as far as his status in this country.
I know one of the things we've talked about on Court TV is the fact that, this is the scariest kind of crime because by all accounts, he didn't know Mollie Tibbetts. He didn't have a relationship with her or go to school with her and know her from class or be a relative. All these things, typically we know statistically, most victims of violent crimes like this actually know the person that does it to them. In this case, how much do you think that will influence the jury or create even more passion, if that's the right word, in the jury, knowing that she didn't know this guy? He just randomly picked her if, in fact, they convict him.
I think it could cut both ways. If this is a situation where this Mollie didn't know this man, I mean, you can only imagine what a jury, how they're going to feel. They're going to relate to her. A stranger is stalking her out of nowhere as she's jogging. And eventually her body is found and he leads the officers to the cornfield. I mean, no matter what defense he puts out there, if he puts out self-defense, what business did he have stalking this woman, right? So he's going to have real trouble and the jury is going to get really upset. It's just scary. Anyone who tries to relate to what's happening here, it's that random thing. The randomness of it is scarier. That means, is there something psychologically wrong with this individual? Is he a psychopath? Why is it that he did what he did, if he in fact did it? It just brings more emotion and more fear into the picture and makes a jury more likely to convict. At the same time, though, if you look at it from the other way, from the other side, the defense can argue that there's no motive here. Why would he kill her? For no reason. And what evidence is there that he is a psychopath or he did it for some strange? It gives him the opportunity to maybe argue that something else happened. Maybe someone else showed up. I mean, he's blocked his memory. Something must have happened. Maybe someone hit him and he lost consciousness. I have no idea what they're going to be saying because obviously they've got access to the facts, at least their client's version, and they know more than any of us do. So they could come up with all sorts of theories to distance him from the crime, despite the fact that there was blood in his trunk and he was able to lead prosecutors. He may have been a victim himself, or he may have witnessed something and he's blocked part of it.
And Laura, you raised a really good point, and that is if he chooses to point the finger at other suspects. Tell us evidence-wise, if you're the defense attorney in this case, are you going to bring in the fact that there were 4 prior suspects that law enforcement looked into before they landed on this particular suspect who's now the defendant?
you're definitely going to make a motion. You're going to do everything possible to bring those. I mean, think about it. We're talking about reasonable doubt here. You want to raise reasonable doubt. I mean, yes, the defense doesn't have to prove anything, but the idea that there were 4 other suspects, that's pretty strong, and that's enough a lot of times to raise that reasonable doubt, to have enough reasonable doubt to get the man acquitted.
Yeah, you're right. I don't disagree with you.